Now, two stories today that are quite interesting about the housing issues that we have. Houses and flats and properties in the UK, they have risen by up to 20% since COVID, but are expected to plunge 9% by the beginning of 2024, so in just over a year's time. There is a roller coaster, it's being described of, as property prices. Soaring prices since COVID, and now going and falling since the autumn statement aftermath. First-time buyers and those in the north are in danger of negative equity, even though prices are going up at other places in the UK. For instance, the southwest and southeast seeing the highest rises since 2019. And I guarantee you, stick this story on the front page and one in the newspapers. If this had been around for one of this morning's newspapers, this would have been on the front page. Because we are obsessed with the prices of properties in this country. Probably because when you consider the last conversation we were having in the last hour, it's one of the few easy ways in which you can gain wealth in this country, because they tax you for everything else. Meanwhile, we have Michael Gove telling us that he's actually, now he's a housing minister, saying that he's actually, and he's the Levelling Up Secretary, should say that as well, that traditional architecture should be revived. Now, there is method in his madness. And I'll tell you where this method comes from. House prices are so high, as are rents, and housing is unattainable for a lot of people because of the fact that it is scarce, right? And because of the unforgivable lack of will of the last 20 or 30 years for local authorities and government to build properties, which is the most stupid failure of them, because especially when interest rates were low, they could have built countless houses and it would have been an asset that those authorities would have owned. It would have put money back in their pocket. So stupid beyond belief. But one of the reasons why some new developments don't get greenlit is because, frankly, they're ugly. So Gove's logic around this is, if we make houses and developments pretty again, if we say, look, developments need to actually be pretty as well as practical, more of them will get passed, there will be fewer local objections, and we can build more houses. He said too many British towns are being let down by insipid planning, which he blamed for much of the opposition to new housing developments. I think he's onto something. In my borough where I live, honestly, I swear to God, you should see some of what they green light in Lambeth. I mean, it is horrific. There was a block of flats being built near where I live the other day. I swear to God, I thought it was the new bus station, but it was a block of flats. It's always disgusting glass and tubular steel, which ends up going horrible colours. Have you seen some of them as well are clad? They're all cladding, right? Usually safe cladding. And you think, oh my God, it looks beautiful for about the first month. And then as soon as it rains, it all gets stained and looks awful. Vauxhall, ye gods, Vauxhall in southwest London. What has Vauxhall done? A Zone 1 area, which is just now a cacophony of hideous glass buildings. The awful St George's Wharf development, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's just basically a stained beige development right by the river. There is a bus shelter in Vauxhall which looks like the cover of the covers they have on a petrol station. It's this huge silver thing. It is hideous. Absolutely hideous. And I can only presume, and I'm not saying this happens in Lambeth, I'm saying it probably happens everywhere, backhanders must happen. Because you look at it and you think, who designed this? Was it Stevie Wonder? Was Stevie Wonder the architect? There is a road in Lambeth that was beautiful. I'll tell you another road in Lambeth where there was the most beautiful Victorian houses. I used to walk down that road every day to get back to my flat. Beautiful old Victorian houses. And they knocked one down to build glass flats, so all the rest of the houses are Victorian. Now, I don't mind if they need to build something new, but build it with a Victorian facade and then make it modern behind. Well, Holly Price is a housing expert and joins me now live here on Talk TV. Holly, is Michael Gove onto something here? Is our hideousness of architecture one of the reasons why we've got a housing crisis, or is this sort of puff and piffle from him and actually it runs deeper than that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is to do with community. So I personally don't think new builds are too horrendous, and it's all subjective at the end of the day, isn't it? You know, some people like the 1970s or Victorian properties, but some really like the new build, type. That's fine. It's all subjective. But I think that the problem is not so much making properties prettier, it's more putting back into the community, because I think a lot of planning applications get rejected by communities because they're not putting anything back into the community, such as a play area, looking at the infrastructure of the actual village or town. Can this new development actually take on what the shops there, the roads or the transport, can that actually be fulfilled by what's already there? And I think that is more of a problem than actually if it's looking pretty. You know
what else we don't do anymore is what has seemed to become a dirty word is bricks. Why don't we build anything by brick? My dear friend Cavan has just bought a new flat, right? He's just messaged me, actually. I think he might be watching. He's just bought a new flat in a new development out in Beckton in London. I went and saw it a couple of months ago, and I went in there, and I just was overwhelmed because they were bricks. It was 2 blocks of flats built with brick. And, of course, the thing with brick, I mean, yeah, it sounds groundbreaking, bricks.
Groundbreaking, yeah.
Literally groundbreaking. But we don't build with brick anymore. Brick lasts, and brick actually, 50 years later looks nice. Whereas there are so many developments, certainly in London, which are sort of glass and steel, and, they try too hard to look sort of, architecturally, oh, look what we've done here, it's amazing. I don't care. I just want it to look nice. Firstly, I want it to look nice, but secondly, I want every single planning officer to not look at the plans as they are now. I want them to be looked at as if, what are they going to look like in 30 years' time? Are they going to be stained? Are the materials going to fade? Are they going to start to look rotten? Is it going to get a bit rusty? Is it going to look awful in a few years' time? Why don't we do that?
I completely agree with you, actually, because, there are a couple of developments. So I live in York, beautiful, beautiful city, and surrounding villages are fantastic as well. But there are some new build areas that have been built and actually they've not been finished, or again, like you get materials that are used for being eco-friendly, which I completely agree with, but it's looking at the materials, for in the long run, the longevity of, wooden cladding, is that really going to stay nice for a long time? And yes, there is a big thing in this country. We want our houses to look nice. Like you said earlier, we're obsessed with our properties. We're obsessed with how much our properties might be worth, what they look like. Of course we are. And I think, though, if you get some fancy architects in and you're looking at properties, what's the cost of that then? We're spending more and more money on fancy architects, fancy materials, when actually it's the community that needs to be looked at, not so much
completely
the actual.
Agree. And we used to build things in the Victorian era that were beautiful, with beautiful detailing. When I did an extension on my house, I paid a fortune more because I wanted reclaimed brick. I wanted it designed so it looked like in years to come, it will look like the house was always meant to have this extension, because I find it awful when you take old, beautiful buildings and you just demolish them for some sort of hideous new build. You make a really good point with infrastructure, though, and whose responsibility does the infrastructure actually fall on? So if you're a developer and you've got a piece of land and you say, right, I'm going to build 6 flats on this, and the local community say, well, hang on, no, we can't sustain another 6 flats here because there isn't the parking or there isn't whatever else, then is that down to the developer? Should it be down to the local authority? Who does that fall upon?
I think They need to work together. That's the whole point of, bringing new housing and opportunity to a place, to a town, to a village, whatever, to a city. I think that they need to work together better, because I think it's not one sole responsibility of the developer, nor is it the sole responsibility of the council. I think it's to put it to the community and saying, okay, what is it that you want from this? What do you envisage, your lifestyle to be like here in this place? And I think that's something that needs to be really worked on between them both.
I had a suggestion earlier from a tweet saying, look, we need to be taxing the hell out of buy-to-let landlords, of which I am one, by the way. I need to declare my interest. Some people suggest rent controls. Some people suggest other measures like that. Now, my feeling is those measures are all great at making people feel better about themselves and hammering landlords, but they won't actually solve the problem. If anything, they'll make the problem worse, because a lot of landlords will just say, well, I'll just keep the place empty or I'll exit the market altogether, meaning the amount of properties that are rentable will fall. What is your view on those sorts of measures, and what would solve the housing problem? If you were housing secretary, so two questions. If that's not going to solve things, what would solve the housing crisis here in the UK?
I think it's a double-edged sword there, because, you tax landlords, or you tax investors, and to a point where if you look at like the mortgage rates currently, it doesn't make sense at the moment really to be a new landlord or to be buying new properties, because your return is it's minimal at the moment, unless you're deciding to keep it for a long, long time. It just doesn't work with the numbers. So you put your property on the market, you sell it, and then you bring property onto the market so that first-time buyers and home movers get to purchase something. But then you've also got a renting, obviously, crisis where, the supply and demand is just not there. The supply is not there for the amount of people that are looking. So it's difficult, isn't it? Because you give up those rental properties for the movers who can actually afford to move, and then you've got a problem with, again, lack of stock. So you're just pushing rent up, you're pushing up that demand, and it's just not sustainable again. Look, I don't think there's any one answer to either of them. I think that you mentioned earlier on about a roller coaster. I think property, full stop, is a roller coaster. We've had it before, we've seen it before. House prices go up, they come down, they go up, they come down, and it's just the way of property. That's just how it works. I don't think there's a one sole answer to solving the housing crisis, apart from, if you're thinking of moving, you've got to go and try and put your property on the market, because if everybody just waits, again, it's that lack of stock. And
I always think as well, if you can afford it and you can get the deposit, buy whenever. Yeah. Buy whenever. Don't wait, because if prices go down, it then becomes more difficult to get a mortgage, and they put the rates of the mortgage anyway, so you pay that way. So just buy if you ever can. I'm passionate about people getting onto the property ladder, anyone being able to, and also managing your expectations in order to do that for your first property, because, we've all had to do that. But listen, really good to talk to you, Holly Price, housing expert. Obviously, housing is one of the big problems that we face here in the UK. How would you solve the problems around housing? And are ugly properties part of the problem? You can call and tell me right here, live from the Talk Radio studio. This is Talk TV.